Nothing makes a hero more than what they give up. As Thanos told Gamora after the snap, his agenda to save the universe, in his mind a wholly justified heroic action, had cost him absolutely everything. Even in Thanos' warped, amoral mind, the fact that he had been forced to give up the one thing in his entire life that he loved, that being his daughter, made him even more heroic. He was wrong, obviously, because he was a big bollocky chin monster, but his sentiment rings true, which is precisely why so many comic book movies use selfless acts as a true mark of worthiness or heroism. So it's no surprise that the MCU as a whole has featured plenty of tragic, heartbreaking, but epic moments based around this principle. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are the 10 biggest ever sacrifices in MCU movies. Number 10. Bruce Banner sacrifices his own happy ending. Avengers Age of Ultron. It might have been a pretty contentious storyline in Joss Whedon's Avengers Age of Ultron and gave us the worst line in the entire MCU, hide the zucchini, but there was something valuable in the romance between Black Widow and Bruce Banner, and the Hulk to be honest, because it was always a menage a trois after all. It gave Banner more of a reason to wrestle with the morality of his very existence, and added an emotional sting to the tragedy of Banner's condition. And as Age of Ultron built up anxiety around him losing control, seeing him wrestle with what drew him to the Avengers and a desire to not Hulk smash that all to bits was genuinely compelling. In the end, he gave up his chance of normalcy and romance and flew off to self-imposed exile, sabotaging both his and Nat's feelings for the good of the world. Number 9. We're All Groot, Guardians of the Galaxy. It doesn't matter that Groot came back in a fashion when he died the first time, or that his death resulted in baby Groot and the delirious delight of watching him dancing to Mr. Blue Sky. There's nothing that can take away how much his sacrifice for the rest of the Guardians crew hurt. Groot was introduced as an outsider like Rocket, and Guardians was as much about the crew all coming together as a family as it was about the quest to stop Thanos getting his hands on the Power Stone or to stop Ronan going berserk on Xandar. That was realised in two pivotal moments. The second was when they all held hands to use the Power Stone against Ronan, but the first was when Groot sacrificed himself. In order for Rocket to really belong and to save his new friends, Groot made the ultimate sacrifice, and in doing so he transformed our perceptions of Rocket too, making for an even more emotionally loaded scene. Number 8. Doctor Strange comes to bargain. Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange knows a thing or two about sacrifice. He was, after all, party to several million sacrifices when he saw the more than 14 million futures of Avengers Endgame, and he can't have missed the emotional cost of them. But Strange also had qualifications of his own that allowed him to tell Tony Stark that he had to give up his life, because he had effectively done the same thing himself. At the end of Doctor Strange the movie, when the Dark Dimension threatens to envelop his own, Strange takes the unprecedented decision to lock himself in a time loop with Dormammu, knowing he can't possibly hope to survive against the demon. He goes there gambling that Dormammu's frustrations at being trapped for eternity would be enough of a bargaining chip to get him to leave Earth alone. And considering the creature is immortal and is sort of used to eternity, that is one hell of a play. But all along during this, Strange has given himself up to be endlessly killed until that immortal being grows bored. He would feel every death, remember, every moment, and that is a huge sacrifice. Number 7. Yondu is the daddy. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Yondu was always going to die in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. The story of Peter Quill finding his real father inevitably called for some conflict between his biological one and the man who had been a father figure to him all of his life, and that could only ever lead one way. I mean, it's not just like they could have sailed off into space together to bond, it's just not what their relationship ever was. But that doesn't mean it wasn't still an incredibly heartbreaking moment when Yondu bit the dust. And that's because Yondu always genuinely cared for his young Star-Lord, even to the point of allowing himself to be overthrown by his crew, and seeing his loyalists butchered by Taserface for their part. He gave up all of that, his access to riches, his power, his crew, because he wanted to protect Peter. And then, in his final moments, he went one step further, giving up the very breath in his lungs so that his son could live. Number 6. Steve Rogers gives up his dance. Captain America, the First Avenger. Sacrifices don't always have to be about death. Before we even had an Avengers team, Captain America set the foundation for heroism in the MCU by giving up his life to save the world, or at least to prevent an unspeakable tragedy. By the end of the first Avenger, Steve has kind of got everything that he yearned for and then even more. But the important thing is that his rewards are more linked to the goodness of his heart than the size of his biceps or his value in the war effort. And of course, that just meant he would end up giving himself and his heart's true love for the greater good as well. Just as Steve was willing to die to save the other recruits when he dived on the grenade, he brought his story around full circle by crashing Red Skull's plane into the Arctic to stop it doing more damage. In that moment, he didn't just give up his existence, but he gave up what his life was supposed to be, and everything he had earned, everything he'd ever wanted, that was so close to being in reach. Number 5. Quicksilver saves Hawkeye, Avengers Age of Ultron. All the way through Age of Ultron, it looked like we were going to lose Hawkeye. We even got to meet his family, as if Joss Whedon was just keen for him to walk around with a big dead meat sign on his noggin. But then it all turned out to simply be a red herring, and the real Whedon moment targeted someone else entirely. At the end of the movie, Hawkeye has quickly grown into a sort of surrogate father for the twins after their defection from Ultron. So when the time comes for Hawkeye's inevitable death, Quicksilver throws himself in front of the bullets meant for Clint, sacrificing himself so that the Barton children don't have to face the same unspeakable tragedy that befell his own life. Number 4. Vision gives up his life, Avengers Infinity War. He might have been transformed from a walking nuke to a polo neck-wearing buffoon when it turned out he was way too powerful to accommodate in the MCU. But Vision was still a great character. Well, is a great character, I guess, since he's coming back for WandaVision. He was also at the center of one of the most complex but genuinely believable romantic relationships in the franchise, as he and Scarlet Witch were unified by their otherness, and their will to understand who and what they are, and fell in love. Unfortunately, because the love of a witch and a robot is forbidden, possibly, it was always going to end badly, what with there being an Infinity Stone in the middle of Vision's forehead. Rather than allowing himself to be killed for it though, Vision did his most human thing, giving up his life and his love for Scarlet Witch for the good of the universe. It was as touching as it was tragic. And the worst of it is that it all kind of proves inconsequential, but that's sort of the point. Thanos is so powerful in this moment that even the greatest heroic act means nothing. That's a nasty way to go, the poor guy. Hopefully, everything is alright by WandaVision. Number 3. Black Widow wipes the red out of her ledger, Avengers Endgame. There may be some questions over whether her sacrifice should have counted to the Soul Stone, but nonetheless, the sight of Black Widow tossing herself into oblivion so that her fellow Avengers had a chance to reverse Thanos' crime against existence was shocking and bloody devastating. Having been the Avenger with the most baggage, she was, for all intents and purposes, the enemy of everything they stood for, at least initially. She was, in her own words, a monster with red in her ledger, who was probably responsible for just as many innocent deaths as the Winter Soldier. But Nat wanted to do better. She sought to rebalance her moral debts. And she finally got to do just that in Endgame, giving herself up so that Clint Barton could live for his family, despite the emotional cost of his murderous rampage, presumably, and it was actually very fitting that she'd be the one to kill herself in the name of heroism. Even Tony Stark's sacrifice couldn't have been possible without hers. Number 2, Yinsen saves Tony Stark, Iron Man. My boy Dr. Yo Hinson was never a super soldier or a god, and he had no superpowers beyond the strength of his convictions and his intellect. He was, however, the keystone for the entire MCU, because he almost single-handedly transformed Tony Stark from a conceited, disinterested, greedy playboy shaggerman into the hero who would ultimately lay down on the wire for his comrades. Yinsen sacrificed himself when he and Tony Stark were held captive by the 10 Rings, in order to give his new friend a chance to finish the Mark I Iron Man suit and escape. And yes, there was something in it for himself because he got to be reunited with his family, but his final challenge to Stark about his legacy and his company's role in war is what makes Tony more than just the Iron Man armor. He challenges Tony to be the best man that he can be, and rubber stamps that by sacrificing his own life. It's a profoundly important moment in the first decade of the MCU, and it's one that deserves far more attention than it actually gets. Number 1, Tony gives up his perfect life, Avengers Endgame. Upon reflection, Tony Stark was always going to die. He had struggled for years with the question of being able to give up being Iron Man, to the point that it seemed almost a dangerous compulsion, and his plans to save the world and the universe usually involved him not being there to see it actually saved. In fact, it all kinda stems back to Captain America challenging him on never being the one to jump on the grenade. Ever since then, he's tried to sacrifice himself a couple of times, and he finally succeeded at the climax of Endgame. But when it finally came, it was different. Tony had retired from being Iron Man, and had settled down with Pepper and had a child. He had finally put aside his concerns at being tied to existence by love and gone for a life of happiness that it didn't seem like he felt he deserved. Consequently, when he snapped his fingers and gave up everything to take down Thanos, he was throwing away his own happy ending, one that had come at monumental cost, and it was utterly devastating to watch. He might have been flawed, but he redeemed himself in some style. So that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Are there any sacrifices I missed off this list? And do you agree with the number placement? For me, Tony Stark is kind of unbeatable. I have no idea how the MCU is going to top it. But while you're there, could you give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to whatculture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. And I'll see you soon.